You get smarter every single time you pick up your phone and start scrolling on social media. Now you may say that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I lose IQ points every time I open up TikTok or Twitter. And not surprisingly, a lot of people would agree with you. But let me tell you why that just isn't true, and why that thumbnail I made might not be too far-fetched. Okay, it probably still is, but social media stars like Addison Rae or Charli D'Amelio may as well have degrees in psychology because they just know exactly what people want. And you might not know it, but you have some of these skills too, just by scrolling through your phone. The average attention span in 2021 was only 5 seconds, meaning you have to be really interesting to keep people's attention.
Do you know that in Avengers Infinity War, Tony Stark? No PowerPoint.
Wow, that was kind of rude, but before you scrolled, I was going to say that your attention has to be earned. We've been trained so well that you can recognize an ad and ignore it in milliseconds. I mean, really, only 3% of people actually click on ads that show up on their social media pages, whereas 100% of grandmas are still falling for the old credit card info scam in their Yahoo email junk folder. I mean, why don't they just get it? Well, it's because they don't have the same training that you have. Young people's brains, more than anybody, knows what's real and what's fake. This is why brands like Duolingo have completely let go of traditional marketing, because they know that weird things do well. I mean, have you ever seen a famous celebrity or company start up a TikTok page and they barely get any views on their videos? Take for example BuzzFeed. They have 1.2 million followers, but they can't even get 100 likes on their videos. I mean, come on guys, that's terrible. Instead of actually trying to appeal to their audience, they're just repurposing YouTube content and posting it on their TikTok. And while it's definitely a lot easier to do that, it's obvious that it doesn't really work. I mean, let's say you're really good at playing basketball and you're even good enough to go pro, but you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, so you decide to try out soccer as a second sport. And before you start, you think, I'm good at basketball, so I should be good at soccer, right? But once you start playing, you realize that you're terrible at soccer because none of those skills translate to this other sport. You see, nobody would actually think like this, and I don't know why people think it works with social media. If you make a 30-minute YouTube video and then trim it down to 15 seconds for a TikTok, people can tell that you put in no extra effort for this completely different platform. So this makes it really difficult for creators and companies to utilize all of these different platforms to advertise to people who are constantly bombarded with advertisements. I mean, really, have you ever sat down and thought about how many advertisements you see every single day? Probably not, and even if you did, you'd probably give up, because the average person sees 6,000 to 10,000 ads every single day. Whether it's those unskippable ads on your YouTube videos, or those ones on your For You page on TikTok, or anywhere, really, you're always being advertised to. So let's do the math here. Say you're 18 years old and you got a phone when you were 5. That means you've seen 37,960,000 ads in your lifetime. And then to go even further, let's assume that every ad you see takes 3 seconds to watch, which is pretty conservative. That would mean that you've spent almost 4 years of your life watching advertisements. So you're an expert on advertising, whether you realize it or not. You've seen so many that you know what works and what doesn't. An ad has to really stick out if it's gonna get your attention amongst all of these other ones you're seeing every single day. And that's why these people are so smart. Yeah, sure, they just lip sync and dance and become famous like everybody else, but there's a lot more that goes into it than just that. They have the same training that you have, and they make content that they know people will love. They create a portrait of themselves online, which is barely the person that they actually are in real life. This is why so many celebrities don't even use their real name. They hide behind a facade, which people think that they can relate to. They do whatever it takes to keep your attention, and since you're so smart, it's becoming harder and harder to do that. And that's why you've heard every YouTuber starting to talk about retention. So what is retention? Well, social media companies want you to stay on their app scrolling through this dumb content for as long as possible. And the content that keeps people on the app longer is the content that they're gonna recommend to the audience. So the creators on the app are trying to get you to watch their videos as long as possible so that the app will then recommend their content. Just think about this. The average attention span is only 5 seconds. And to be a good YouTuber, you're supposed to hold people's attention for, let's say, 50% of the time. The average length of a YouTube video is around 10 minutes, so that means that you have to hold people's attention for 5 minutes straight. I mean, it's a pretty hard thing to do, especially since the platform is so saturated now and everybody's trying to do the same thing. The top 3% of channels account for almost 85% of the views on YouTube. So what that basically means is that if you're a small channel, you have very little chance of succeeding. But I take that as a challenge, and that's why I'm gonna try to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. So subscribe, please. So, if we're so smart from being on social media all the time, then why isn't everybody famous on TikTok or YouTube? And that's a good question, but the answer is basically summed up in this quote by George Bernard Shaw. Those who can, do. Those who can't, teach. Have you ever seen those social media gurus who claim to have the secret to going viral, but they can barely get any views on their own videos? They dish out this generic advice which sounds good to people who don't know anything about YouTube, but it's really just surface level advice. vidIQ, Film Booth, all of these channels use this same strategy of leading people to success that they can't achieve, which therefore makes them successful. But the issue with these channels is the same issue that almost everybody has, and it's why everybody can't be famous. We already know how to appeal to people on social media, but most people don't have the ability to create that content. So we're stuck with what's called avolition. We know how to be successful, but the route to getting there is so difficult that most people give up before even starting. And even for people who do start, most people just don't have the ability to make their ideas come to life. Now, this would be a perfect segue to a brand deal with something like Skillshare, but unfortunately I only have like 250 subs, so not gonna happen. Maybe in the future though. So now you see that social media has made you too smart, and if I've kept you this long in the video, I guess that means I've done a pretty good job of keeping your attention. Anyways, I'm gonna be trying out an experiment done by Jack Gordon where I post 20 TikToks over the span of a week and see if I can get to 100,000 followers. But I'll let you know how that goes next time.